Roxbury this morning, this afternoon than we expected. So apologies for being late.
Transportation!
Transportation! Oddly enough. Somebody said, "Man, you should just take a ferry." I was like, "Funny you should mention that." Funny you should mention that. Or train, pretty much any way other than the current way that you've got. So a couple things before we start. One, Madam Mayor, thank you for your leadership, for the example that you set. As I started to kick this crazy idea around about jumping into a race for the United States Senate, there were a couple of people I called just to say, "Hey, what do you think?" One of them was right there. I've gotten to know the mayor, obviously, over the course of the past several years as she's been in office, and called her early on because I know not just what I think of her, but more importantly, what other elected officials think of her, the respect that her community has for her, and her assessment as to what, more than anything, our communities and our country needs. And the fact that she said, when she said, "Give it a shot," was an extraordinary vote of confidence and just what I needed to hear to make sure that I didn't think that this was an absolutely insane idea, which part of it still is. But Madam Mayor, I am so grateful to have had your confidence from day one and before then. So honored that on our announcement weekend, our second stop or third stop from that day was up here with you side by side in a soup kitchen.
Yeah,
Lifebridge. Handing out, making meals and handing them out to folks that were in need of, or were in danger of going hungry. And the type of leadership that you show every single day as an elected official, trying to do everything you can to give back to the community that put you in that position. It's the type of leadership that we all should hope for. So thank you. I'm so grateful. And everybody else, thanks for coming. Really thrilled to have you guys here. Madam Mayor, thank you. The good thing about getting an endorsement early on from Mayor Driscoll is you know that no matter what else you do with Mayor Driscoll, it's going to turn out well. So Madam Mayor, thank you. Really grateful for you pulling everybody in today. I'm thrilled to be back in Salem, and yes, as the mayor said, we will be back again. Our team has, somebody actually counted it up, we've been in the race for about 54 days, and we have been in 53 different towns. Held events in 53 different towns over 54 days. And about a third of that time, at least, I got to be down in D.C. So that is a short way of saying my staff is trying to kill me. Thanks, guys, in the back. Yeah. Somebody should let them know. Thank you. But we're having a blast, and we've been out and about, and we'll get into that in a second. But we will be back again. That is my promise and pledge to you. So I figured I'd give you a little bit about who I am. Most of you probably know a little bit. And then why I got in this race, and then we'll take some questions until I get yanked and told to go someplace else. Sounds good. Fair enough? More or less? Great. So first off, my name's Joe. Hopefully you guys knew that. Born down in Boston, I got a twin brother, Matt, who, as Kevin will remind, Kevin worked for my dad for an awfully long time. Kevin will remind everybody that the 8 minutes separating us were, according to my brother, the greatest 8 minutes of his life. And if you have twin brothers, you would know that that's exactly what twin brothers would say. Went off to college in California, came back, went off to the Peace Corps in la República Dominicana. Algunos dominicanos, exactamente, gracias. So I spent about 2.5 years in the Dominican Republic, where I worked predominantly on two big things. One of which was helping a group of young men that were getting horribly exploited by a tourism sector that was making millions off of their hard work. And I took advantage of a little-known law that helped, not even, but helped get them a fair shake for the work that they were putting in. And about a mile away was a Haitian community that was getting even more exploited, even more degraded by the company that they were working for and the circumstances around it. And as hard as I worked in that community, my efforts were actually largely not successful. And I ended up going to law school to try to figure out how the law could be so powerful in one place, and a mile away, so impotent at actually trying to resolve major issues of inequities. And I found out they don't teach you that at law school. I spent about 2 of the next years when I was in law school as a legal aid volunteer in communities like Dorchester and Roxbury and Mattapan, trying to keep people in their homes in the midst of a foreclosure crisis after the financial markets collapsed. And it was a front row seat to see how sometimes in our society, you put the burden on the folks that can least afford it, even though they did nothing wrong. These were folks that most of them were paying the rent, were doing everything they were supposed to do, and yet were still being shown the door and kicked out on the street. Getting into the court system got me really interested in our criminal justice system. I spent the next couple of years as a prosecutor, both on the Cape and then in Middlesex County outside of Boston. And as a line prosecutor, you get whatever comes in through that door. It is the emergency room of the criminal justice system. So whatever comes in, on your plate. And for me, it meant largely, not exclusively, but largely 2 types of cases. One, drugs. And not so much people buying and selling, but the consequence of what happens when somebody is addicted. The property crime, the lengths at which people will go when you are suffering from addiction or mental illness, and what happens to you when you can't get access to treatment. And the second, domestic violence. And the recognition that at its core, both of those cases are about power. It's about who as a society we choose to protect, and how, and what happens when we don't. And if as a prosecutor your goal was to try to say, hey, that stack of files that starts this high, you want to make it that high, then you realize you got to be working further upstream in policy. And that, on a good day, is what we are supposed to do. So I ran for office, and I've spent the last 7 years, in representing the 4th District of Massachusetts, largely south and west of Boston. It's communities like Brookline and Newton and Wellesley and Needham, all the way down to the south coast, Fall River and Taunton, some communities that are not, every community's got its issues, but not nearly as wealthy as some of the ones right outside of Boston. And so my effort has been focused really on 2 main things. One, economic opportunity. Trying to make sure that communities like Fall River and Taunton get the same access to success for their kids that the ones just outside of Boston do. And the second, the basic role of, I think, what government's supposed to be. For folks that need a helping hand, a little bit of extra protection to make sure that they are seen and heard, you stand up for them, you fight for them. People suffering with mental illness, immigrant communities, lower income communities, LGBT and a trans community particularly, making sure that they are protected and seen and heard. And folks, that, more than anything else, is why I decided to jump in this race. Because at no time in modern American history have we ever seen a president of the United States not just look upon difference as a weakness, but to try to exploit and scapegoat folks that are most in need of that protection. And so, we had to push back against the hate and the vitriol and the bigotry that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth and the Oval Office every single day. But you also have to recognize, though, that for those folks that I believe we should protect, that some of those challenges existed long before Donald Trump ever ran for office in the first place. Across our country today, 500,000 people will go homeless. 500,000. 37 million will go hungry. A minimum wage worker working full-time cannot afford a 2-bedroom apartment in any city in our country. We've got the highest rates of incarceration and the highest rates of maternal mortality anywhere in the developed world. And it gets worse if you break that down by race and ethnicity. Half of all of the adults in our country will not get access to the mental health care that they need today in the United States of America. And it's worse for kids. I was in Attleboro a couple months ago. They couldn't get the stretchers down the hallway in the emergency room because the ER was overflowing with mental health patients. There's an 83-year-old senior citizen who had been there for 5 days waiting for a bed. There's an 8-year-old little boy, 150 hours and counting, waiting for a bed. All right? And I think we can do better. I think the richest, most powerful nation in the world is capable of caring for that kid. I think, yes, It is okay in this country for success to be an achievement, but the protection of basic dignity doesn't have to be. That every single one of us deserves a government that says, we see you, we hear you, we got your back. And we're going to do everything we can to defend you. And that is what this race is about. It's about recognizing that if you believe that that is what we are promised by being in this country, a country that says we are all created equal, that you have a government that is going to see you and hear you. And that starts with showing up. Shoulder to shoulder, side by side, meeting people where they are, listening to their concerns, and make sure that you know that you're taking their stories, their hopes and dreams and fears with you down in Washington to fight for them every single day. But it's also an acknowledgement that when our founding fathers made that promise about we the people and all created equal and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, when they said we, they actually meant rich, white, Protestant men. And that was it. But our country's story is about expanding that definition of we. Women, minorities, no matter the God of your prayers, the color of your skin, the language of your native tongue, the country that you came from, that we are, in fact, created equal. And here, you do deserve protection. And that for the first time in modern history, you've got a president that is actually trying to shrink that definition back to say that you count more than her, or you count a little bit less than him. This is a fight of our times, and it's going to take all of us to push back. And I'm all in, and I'm so excited that you guys are here with us. My promise to each and every one of you is that over the course of this next year, we're going to go to every corner of our Commonwealth and plenty of corners of our country and make sure that when we say you got a government that sees you and hears you, that we mean it. Because I have no doubt what history will say about Donald Trump 50 years from now. And I'm confident in that because we've seen it happen before. The question that I think we do have to wrestle with is how we'll describe all of us and our response to him. And I'm so excited for what this year in front of us is going to do. I'm thrilled to have you with me. Thanks for being here.
When you get down to Washington, I'm pretty sure you will. What do we
Thanks.
do?
We're working on it.
What do we do about another president coming along like Trump who doesn't want to obey the law? How do we improve the oversight of this of a person like that? I mean, he won't even answer subpoenas or allow any of his people.
So the best thing that we can do with regards to the current president.
Right. I'm talking about him, and if some other nut comes along like
Some other guy after.
yeah.
My parents brought me up to be, I'd like to think, a good sport. There are times when it is worth running up the score to making sure that you leave no doubt about what this election is all about and about I don't need no more evidence to judge the content of the character of Donald Trump.
Right.
What is at stake is the character of our nation. And we have a chance to prove to everybody else that calls this country home, and everybody else in the world that would like to, every place else that believes that this country is actually something special, as to what we believe leadership is, and the type of country we believe that we can be, and the example we believe we can set for the rest of the world. That is not a squeak by election. That is not one where you sit there and say, hey, but for this and that, maybe somebody else would have won. We leave no doubt. And you run up that score. And we make sure that every single person out of every single corner of this nation, that those voices are heard. We've got that chance. And I hope we take it so that the next person that tries to do what he has done, that thought won't even enter their mind. And one last little caveat there. You guys all saw the news about Roger Stone yesterday, convicted on all 5 counts, facing potentially 50 years in jail. You've got the president's former campaign manager, his national security advisor, his deputy campaign manager, right? Now one of his top aides on that campaign. You have multiple, that ain't all of them. You have multiple Trump officials, both on that campaign and some that sought to serve him in official office, that have either been found guilty or pled guilty to serious violations and will spend multiple years in jail. The fact that it has taken this long to hold them accountable, yes, that's a challenge, but it's also a statement. You go through this and you keep trying to do this, you're gonna go to jail. And our system's gonna find you an account.
But then you got this guy, what he did in Syria. I mean, that shouldn't have been allowed at all. How did he get away with that?
Which guy in Syria? You gotta be a
I
little
mean,
more
when
specific.
he pulled the American troops out of Syria defending the Kurds. That was his sole decision. Nobody else, he didn't answer to anybody for that.
So, without getting too far down the rabbit hole here, because, look, this president, I believe, abuses his authority of office and power in office almost every single day.
Right, yeah.
So that is there. We are in the midst of impeachment proceedings because we believe not that what some aspects of this were a disagreement of policy or that there were some decisions he made that were not correct or not smart or dumb. Presidents are entitled to dumb decisions. That some like that'll happen. This stuff was illegal.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
The issue with regards to Ukraine was illegal. And if you have a president that commits multiple crimes, then I don't know what else you're supposed to do. And so we are doing our best to hold him to account. That process is long. And yes, he's stressing it because he's not cooperating with any of it because, by the way, he knows that what he did was wrong. We got to make sure we're telling that story and we're doing the best we can.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hey, Joe.
What's going on?
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
I have a legitimate question.
Yeah.
This isn't about you. I think you're pretty
Yeah.
great.
Thanks.
I think Marky has done a lot,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of torn. And my question has to do about the timing and also the impact of your decision to run now
Yep.
on all those down ballot races and the resources that are literally getting sucked into filling your seat that are not going to be spent on getting this guy out of office in the presidential level and on winning the Senate back. So can you speak to that, how your decision came about and how are you going to kind of address that on the campaign trail? Because I think people have concerns about that.
Absolutely can. It's a good question, not the first time I've gotten it, and here's what I would say. One, with regards to my decision why I'm running, and then we can get into a number of the other pieces that you said afterwards. But one, Senator Markey's a good man. You haven't heard me say otherwise, and I won't, because he's a decent man. And we agree on an awful lot of things. There's some areas of disagreement. We can get into some of those. I pointed out on our announcement weekend what some of the areas of disagreement were. On 3 or 4 major areas of disagreement, the senator has now signed on the bills that close that area of disagreement, which, welcome to campaigns, that's what happens. So there are some policy differences. The bigger piece is about, from my perspective, the type of senator I believe we should have and that I would hope to be able to be. And that comes down to how you use the power and platform of a Massachusetts Senate seat. One, this is about representation. You show up. You show up in your communities tirelessly over and over and over again to ensure that people know that their voices are in fact being heard, that you are in a conversation with them back down in Washington and back home. And you should say, when you're in Roxbury talking about gun violence, and the impact of gun violence, not just in school shootings and not just from an AR-15, but that everyday traumatic experience of firearms going off in a community, what that means. And that you're in a constant conversation with communities back home because you're here showing up shoulder to shoulder. 2, it's about the causes and who you choose to champion, because you can't pick everything. But it means that you have a choice to actually choose those, who you're gonna show up for and when and why. And for me, what you're gonna get is more of what I hope to have shown over the course of my 7 years in office for the folks that actually need that help most. Mental and behavioral health patients, immigrants, low-income families that, again, everyone's got their challenges and every community has its needs, but it's oftentimes those communities that don't have access to levers of power and that you need. That is the role of government, to make sure that they have a voice at the table and that they've got an opportunity to be heard. And third, perhaps biggest of all, a Massachusetts Senate seat. This is not a swing seat. This is not a seat where you sit there and go, hey, it is enough to sign on to the right bills and to vote the right way. This seat leverages with it the opportunity to craft a narrative for our party, for our country, to build a base, to define what it means to be a Democrat, to ensure that the voices of those across Massachusetts are, in fact, not just represented in the votes that you cast, but to help push the narrative of what our country can actually be. Senator Kerry did that. My uncle did that. Senator Warren's done that. You look at where I've done over the first 3 terms in office, all in the minority in the House. I raised and donated over $5 million to other candidates. It was 3 times more than Senator Markey did. It was $5 million last year. The Globe looked at the first 3 times when I was all in the minority in the House. I was raised and donated 3 times more than Senator Markey. I was in nearly 20 states last cycle campaigning to flip the House. Senator Markey was, according to the Globe, in 0. This is about going to places like Alabama and Arkansas and West Virginia and Kentucky. It's about explaining what it means to be a Democrat. Showing up and fighting for those values and saying, look, we might disagree on some things, but I'll tell you one thing. When you're in Kentucky and you're hearing people say, we hate Obamacare, but we love Kentucky Cares, guess what? That's the same thing. When you hear people talk about the need for climate change, and yes, our climate is changing, and yes, we need to address it, and yes, it's a generational challenge, and yes, I've got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I want us to have a planet for them too. And we can frame our solutions by saying, those coal miners, they're not all that different than our fishermen up here in Gloucester. And let's make sure when we actually try to craft solutions to the challenges of a fishing industry, you know what we would do? We'd put our fishermen at the table. So let's make sure those folks are at the table. Understanding there's a transition that needs to happen, but let's make sure it happens. It's about leadership. And with respect, when it comes to those 3 areas, about representation, about who you champion, and about what comes with a Massachusetts Senate seat, I think we can do more. With regards to the specific questions you had about money being raised or allocation of resources or volunteers or anything else. 1, you look at the money being raised. Amy McGrath, who's running in Kentucky, raised nearly $11 million last quarter. Jean Shaheen raised $3 million. Sarah Gideon raised $2 million. Jean Shaheen in New Hampshire. Sarah Gideon raised $2 million in Maine. Senator Shaheen raised more money in an off year in that quarter than she ever had in the past. Money is not a problem. Money that is coming in for candidates is not a problem. This race is not taking away significant financial resources from anybody else. You can look at all of the statistics that's coming in for other races, it's just not happening. 2, the idea that somehow because we run an active and engaged and energized campaign that pulls more people into it, young people, students, people that aren't normally involved in politics, that they come in because they say, you know what, we think he's onto something and we actually resonate, something in that message resonates and we want to be part of it. The idea that we think if more people do that, that's somehow a bad thing, that's exactly what a democratic process is supposed to be. That's what a point of a campaign is supposed to be. And by the way, if you think that Donald Trump's main argument is you're not seen, you're not heard, they're taking advantage of you, the way that you fight back on that is you bring more people in to say, we see you, we hear you, we're fighting for you. Like, that's the whole point. A couple weeks after we announced, somebody said, well, what is it going to mean for races up in New Hampshire and the New Hampshire primary? New Hampshire primary is in February. This election is until September. Super Tuesday in Massachusetts, our presidential election is in March. That's not going to have any bearing on it. If anything, all of the candidates, and remember, there's multiple Democrats in this race, not just Senator Markey and I. There's other ones. The fact that we're all building grassroots campaigns that are getting more people involved to go knock on more doors. We sent up nearly 100 volunteers to knock on doors for Senator Warren early in this process. You're not taking anything away from that. You're adding to it. And if we as a party ever get to a place where we think doing less in terms of engaging and interacting with people and getting them involved in a process is somehow better for our party, that is literally the fundamental argument at the moment for Mitch McConnell. The fewer people that vote, the more entrenched special interests, the more important PAC money, the more important and leverage that corporations can have, the better it is for the interest and the agenda set by Mitch McConnell. That's not the politics that I believe in or that I think our party believes in. So I just respectfully don't think I have not heard any of those arguments that is actually reflective of the reality of what it means if you have people running energized campaigns. Yeah.
Thank you so much for running.
Yeah.
You definitely have the care of the community in your DNA, and I appreciate it. My question is about healthcare. I mean, I have a nephew who's 7, he has spina bifida, he does really well, but the Republicans' attitude towards ripping Obamacare apart makes me fear for his future, not just him, but I had a sister with a disability, mental disability. You talked about mental health. We have to make sure that that doesn't get taken away from these people who need it. I mean, it's awful. And keep going to Kentucky, I have family there, we've got to get McConnell out.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
Are you gonna put rent control back on? Because you talk about the homelessness and all of these other things, rent control was taken off when Bush was in office. Are you gonna put rent control back on? I mean, talk about it?
So the way I think about it is not so much whether, so there's rent control and it's not in Massachusetts anymore, right? There are certain communities across the country that have rent control as per local ordinance and local policy. I come at this from a couple of different ways. One, you hear an awful lot of folks talk about more affordable housing, and yes, we need more affordable housing. You also need a lot more housing that is affordable. And that is a separate but related issue. So yes, you need to make more investments in Section 8. Yes, you need to make sure that there's more shelters. Yes, you need to combat homelessness. But if you have an economy that is structured to provide massive economic growth for folks that can afford 6-figure jobs, and then force the folks that actually make a city run, the folks that actually make it run, that they can't afford to live there anymore, what do you see? You see a city that might have the worst traffic commute in the country, which we now do. You see more and more communities getting uprooted and pushed out, and gentrification. For the communities that actually built that up, that no one can afford to live there. And so this is about housing stock. This is also an awful lot, it is about transportation, it's about infrastructure. It's about ensuring that as we actually put in place a foundation to allow for the economic growth that we've seen, that you have in your mind that because of some of the choices that we have made here locally, the median net worth for a white household across greater Boston, net worth, is about $247,000. Anybody know what it is for an African American household, black household? $8. $8. Dominican household, 0. There are structural failures in our economy that are forcing people that can have least ability to access it, less ability to actually invest in themselves, in their families, in their future, that are the ones actually powering this economy forward. And we need to make sure that they're able to get access to that level of economic growth. Rent control on its own, I don't think can wholly do that, but it can be part of the conversation.
We got time for one more, guys. One more question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm glad that you brought up climate catastrophe.
Yeah.
And I have to disagree with you. You said the biggest problem is the income and the inequality. I think our biggest problem is we're not gonna have a planet to live on. I really do not think that any governments in the world are really gonna do anything meaningful about this. And I think a lot of us are gonna be dead in 80 years. But what are you gonna do to help with this climate catastrophe? Salem's gonna be underwater, a lot of coastal communities will too, really soon, sooner than people think.
So, I think, let me put it this way. I think our country faces a variety of challenges. I think the biggest one for our country is that the structures of our economy do not, one, empower American family to meet their own economic needs, and are based off of a system that enables people that are profiting off of a system not to actually fully account for the cost. And one of the biggest ways that happens is pollution. It's global warming. And so I was on the Green New Deal from day one. And while many frame that as a climate issue, I look at it as an economic one.
Of course it is.
Because what the Green New Deal actually articulates is, yes, the scope of the challenges that we confront, but the economic mobilization that is necessary in order to restructure the economy, to put in place the incentives, the investments, the retraining, the just transition that is necessary to stave off the climate catastrophe that you're talking about. What you see, I think, not exclusively, but you see from an awful lot of a younger generation of lawmakers, is not so much even a discussion anymore as to a climate policy, but the acknowledgement that climate policy is healthcare. It's transportation, it's international trade, right? It is intersectional, it is intergenerational. And so how I think about this, we were coming up, I'm not sure you were here when I said we were coming up from Roxbury, that was one of the community activists in Roxbury that I was with an hour ago. First question was on gun violence. Second question, climate change. You know which community has the highest rates of childhood asthma in the state?
Oh, yes, the poor
Springfield.
communities. Yeah, Springfield.
And Chelsea's not far behind.
Yeah.
So this is about a structure of a system that put the costs of the externalities of pollution, amongst other things, on communities that can least afford to bear it, largely low-income immigrant. And so I would put those communities at the center of the policies that we have to reshape and the economic restructuring that is necessary to make sure that not just the communities like this one aren't underwater, but to make sure that 20 years from now, minority sections of Springfield aren't going to be the ones with the highest rates of childhood asthma in the state.
Yeah, that's
Because if they are,
the Carbon Dividend and Innovation Act is a.
it's part of that. There's more to it than that. But
Yeah.
without getting into the details of carbon tax and how we structure that, the people that I think need to be at the center of this are the people that have been taken advantage of most throughout this process already. And that's how I would evaluate climate policy going forward. All right, one last one. Mickey.
Mr. Kenny, I have a question.
Yeah.
With the White House and the Republicans, they want to take away abortion rights and whatnot. For me, I feel like politicians should not have a say on what I can and can't do with my body, and I want people to be educated that Planned Parenthood is not just abortions. They do a lot of medical things for women, and I want for future generations for women to not have issues on what they can do. I want them to have, equal pay. I want them to be seen and heard. Women are just like men as well. We might be different genders, but we're all the same and we're all equal. And I think that is a problem, and it scares me because I don't want politicians in woman's business. It's her right what she can do and what she can't do, and so that scares me, and I want to make sure that women are safe when future generations come.
Be clapping, I just can't. Yes. I don't think I could have said it any better than myself. Right? Women are people too. Right? And if you believe that, then women should be granted the rights that men have as to who is able to make choices over their own body, the ability and the dignity to make an honest living, honest pay for the work that they put in, and to be treated equally throughout our society in ways in which today, even still, they're not. And so, you got anything and everything I can do, I will make sure that we continue on that journey. Thanks, everybody. Great question.